Welcome to another episode of Altitude Shift, the podcast where I explore how to show up at work with greater executive presence, personal authority, and emotional steadiness. I'm your host, Chris Verlet, and today's episode is all about how to say more with less. I want to put my money where my mouth is by making this my shortest episode so far, and you'll notice that I will fail miserably. Because, just like everybody else, I often only realize I'm rambling when even I can't remember what the point of my story or the initial question was. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, it's that rambling or oversharing in a work context isn't cute, it's actually quite harmful for your career. Because when you ramble, people stop listening to you. They'll assume you're either unsure and unprepared, even if that's not the case. And it makes you sound a lot more junior than you are. But look, the good news is, rambling is not a personality flaw. It's just that most of us were never taught how to edit ourselves at work. Never mind how to tell a clear story. So, in today's episode, I'm going to look at why we ramble in the first place, how to spot it quickly when you're doing it, why it matters if you want to progress in seniority, and how to speak in a way that's clearer and more concise. Let me start by talking about why so many of us tend to ramble. It has nothing to do with a lack of intelligence, but it's usually one of three things. Reason one is that you think while speaking. While you're talking, you're actually clarifying your own thoughts and opinions. Your brain is still organizing the idea even though you're already verbalizing it, which, may be fine in a brainstorming session, but really isn't fine when you're in a position of leadership and people are expecting clarity from you. Reason two is that you use words to manage your own discomfort. I call this emotional rambling. It happens when you feel pressure, uncertainty, or the need to prove yourself. And talking makes you feel safer and in control of the situation. But it might feel reassuring to you to hear the sound of your own voice, but it often feels quite overwhelming to the listener. This is why so many people express verbal diarrhea in interviews as well. And then the third reason for rambling is that you might be confusing thoroughness with usefulness. You keep adding context to prove how prepared you are or how credible you are, which may feel like a good thing to do, but it often overwhelms people. And it can also obscure the actual point that you're trying to make, meaning it's harder for other people to follow. In all three cases, rambling is self-protective. You're managing your thoughts, your discomfort, or your need to feel thorough. But none of that actually helps the listener. And the moment you shift from trying to protect yourself to focusing on what the other person actually needs to hear, that's when you'll stop rambling. Now, how to tell if you're rambling? Most people aren't self-aware enough in the moment to catch that they're rambling. So here are some signs that you can notice while you're speaking, even if your listeners are polite enough not to let it on. First, if the question was short and you notice your answer is now getting long, you're rambling. Second, if you're a few sentences in and you still haven't landed a clear point, you're rambling. Strong communicators always deliver their point fast. Third, if you catch yourself opening a second idea before you've properly closed the first, you're rambling. Anytime you hear yourself say, and also, or just to add, it means you're drifting. Fourth, if you're explaining things nobody asked for, you're rambling. Only answer the question you were actually asked. Fifth, if you notice yourself repeating the same point but in a slightly different wording, that's a clear sign that you're rambling. And sixth, if you have that tiny internal thought of, I should probably wrap this up, or you have this sudden unexplained urge to just stop talking, really, that's your cue. You're rambling. So these are 6 very simple behavioral markers, and they don't require deep emotional awareness because you can hear them as you're speaking. I hear some of you think, come on Chris, surely a bit of over communicating isn't that bad. As long as I don't say anything stupid, it's okay, no? Well, I said it earlier and I'll say it again. Rambling isn't some relatively minor communication quirk. It really does shape how people judge your brand and your readiness for more responsibility. First of all, it makes you sound less clear than you are. And people judge your thinking by how you speak, so if you tend to drift a lot in your answers, they'll assume that your mind does the same. Secondly, as you move up the chain of command, people don't have the time to listen to your internal monologues. They want the executive summary, not the TED talk. So if you're a leader, you're expected to be able to filter, prioritize, and land your point fast. Thirdly, the more senior you are, the more weight your words carry. So one casual offhand comment has the potential to send team members or investors or clients into a panic. So you need to choose your words carefully. And fourthly, it weakens your perceived steadiness. When we think of people with gravitas, they usually speak from a place of intention and they know when to stop. When you overtalk, however, you sound anxious rather than authoritative. And finally, and probably most importantly, rambling makes you bloody irritating to listen to. When people experience you as long-winded or hard to follow, they'll eventually avoid asking for your input. And that kind of irritation, it sticks to you, and you don't want to be part of your personal professional brand. So I'm not saying here that everything that comes out of your mouth needs to be highly polished and pitch perfect. Not at all. But you do need to communicate in a way that signals clarity, composure, authority. And the fastest way to do that is by replacing rambling with something a little bit more intentional. That means the antidote to rambling isn't necessarily saying less. The antidote is good storytelling. People often think that good storytelling and telling more of a story are the same, and they're not. There are at least 5 core elements to good storytelling, and I'll talk through each one of them. The first is that any good story has a purpose. Before you open your mouth, you need to know why you're telling the story at all. Not the headline, but the purpose. What you want the listener to understand, to notice, or to reflect on as a result of you telling that story. And you don't necessarily need to share that up front with your listener, but a purpose will guide the story's direction and it'll give you a bit of structure. It's your internal compass, if you want, that keeps you from wandering. And the simplest way to do this is to always check your intention before you start telling the story. What am I trying to show or illuminate here? So that's the first one, having a purpose. The second core element is that a good story always moves forward, and each sentence builds towards something. Rambling, on the other hand, it moves sideways, right? You stack more detail, more context, more information, but without the story actually progressing. A forward-moving story sounds more like, here's what happened, here's what shifted, here's what I learned. So practice keeping yourself on track by noticing whether each sentence pushes the story towards a landing. If it doesn't, it means that you're drifting. The third element of good storytelling is knowing how to stay lean. Use only 1 or 2 essential details. People who talk too much, they drag in everything that comes to mind, and their story loses its shape quite fast. So if you're giving a project update at work, saying something like, we're behind on design, everything else is on schedule, that gives people clarity. But if you start listing every single problem you've encountered, people will very quickly lose the thread. And sometimes the smartest move is not to tell a story at all. A lot of rambling happens when people start adding color when the situation didn't really ask for it. Often the listener just wants the answer. Yes, we're on track, or no, we'll miss the deadline. And if a single line of context genuinely helps, add it. But often you don't need the whole backstory or the build-up. If people need more, they'll ask you. That's what senior intentional communicators do. They give the answer, but not the whole narrative. Fourth, a good story is always audience focused. If the story doesn't help them understand something, it's not a story. It's self-indulgence. And nothing makes people switch off faster. You're telling a story for their understanding, not to process your own thoughts or feelings, at least not in a work context. The easiest way to stay audience focused is to frame your story by telling your audience right at the start why it matters for them. Like in the earlier project update example. We're behind on design, everything else is on schedule, and I'll need a quick decision from you today on whether we reprioritize things. Let me explain, etc. This instantly shifts the center of gravity away from you, and it primes your audience to pay attention to what's expected of them. And fifth, and last, a good story always has a clear ending to it. Once you feel the message has landed, you stop. People who ramble keep going until they run out of steam or finally notice that their audience has switched off. A clean ending sounds like, and that's why I need a clear decision from you today. Or, and that's why I need your input now. Or, and that's what matters here. Do you notice the difference here between telling a story and rambling? Storytelling is intentional. Rambling is random. So, in conclusion, if you zoom out, everything I've talked about in this episode comes down to one thing: strategic editing. Not editing your personality, not editing your intelligence, just editing what you choose to say, when you choose to say it, and how much of it people actually need to hear. It's having the discipline to give the room a clean, edited version of what you're trying to say, not the monologue version. It's knowing the purpose behind your story before you open your mouth. It's recognizing when a one-sentence answer is all that's required. It's choosing one essential detail instead of 10. It's speaking for the audience, not to regulate your own thoughts or because you like the sound of your own voice. And it's using restraint, including silence sometimes, as a way to signal composure and authority. This is what executive presence is all about. And to my fellow non-native speakers out there listening, the strongest communicators aren't always the ones with the biggest vocabularies, but they're the ones who dare to edit themselves. So, if you want more authority, fewer words please. Save the rambling for your hairdresser. The workplace isn't the place for it. Hey, it's Chris here. If this resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone else who needs to hear it. And if you want more insights on leadership, confidence, and growth, you can hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you soon.